Greetings, everyone. This is a pre-recorded version of my presentation at the IABC 2023 conference to be presented in case I am unable to attend in person due to the extreme weather currently happening in New Zealand. I'm going to speak to you today about a very young submarine lava flow that we discovered last year at great depth, 6 kilometers down, beneath the sea surface on the mid-Cayman Rise. I'm speaking on behalf of a group of co-authors, which are shown here on this slide, and I would like to acknowledge our various sponsors for supporting this research. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or Instagram at my contacts below. So this discovery was made using the submersible Alvin, and I'm presenting a poster as well today about the history of using Alvin to study volcanoes under the sea. But I thought I would give you a brief introduction here. This is a vehicle that takes humans to the sea floor, and it has been in continuous or near continuous operation for more than a half century. It's got a long storied history, and the last set of modifications aren't even shown on this diagram. They took place in 2019 to 2022 to enable the vehicle to go down to what we call the Hadal zone at depths below 6 kilometers water depth. And I've provided a link for more information about the earlier history of the vehicle if you'd like to check it out. Just to remind you, the Hadal zone is the very deepest part of the oceans. It's very remote. It's interesting for a variety of reasons, biological and geological and geochemical. From the volcanological perspective, we're really interested in understanding the role of very great water pressure on things like magma emplacement conditions during eruptions, and things like the formation of vesicles and other gas-driven phenomena. Now, Alvin isn't the only vehicle that can reach the Hadal zone. This diagram, everything on the slide, in fact, include human-occupied vehicles, with the one exception of Nereus, which was an autonomous vehicle in the bottom left-hand corner. But this is a very small number of vehicles, and the Hadal Ocean is a very important and understudied area. So each time we can make observations there using one of these vehicles, it's an important contribution. This is another slide just pitching another article, this one in National Geographic, that's sort of an infographic-based presentation where you can click through and learn about various changes to the vehicle over the years, or you can come to my poster today and learn more about that if you want. The last set of upgrades took place in sort of 2 phases. One to sort of change the form factor of the vehicle, which included making a new sphere, which is a little bit larger, although the depth range, the maximum depth of diving was still 4,500 meters. And then just recently, concluding early last year, the sub was upgraded to be able to dive to 6,500 meters water depth. And this is what the sub looked like last summer. And this is the inside. It went from being, as I say, a little bit smaller, very analog, kind of harsh lighting, to something much more digital and obviously much cooler mood lighting in 2022. Okay, so last year, after the sub was completed and certified by the U.S. Navy, a group of us, including myself and Adam Sewell and Anna Michelle, 2 of my co-authors as the co-chief scientists, took the vehicle out for a 2-leg expedition that did a series of dives, first in the Puerto Rico Trench, shown on the right, and then at the Mid-Cayman Rise, shown at the left. I'm only going to be speaking to you about the Mid-Cayman Rise, and in fact, one of the very many dives that we did in the Mid-Cayman Rise. The Mid-Cayman Rise is a very slow spreading rate mid-ocean ridge. It's not contiguous with the rest of the mid-ocean ridge system, but it is a mid-ocean ridge spreading center that separates 3 plates, the North American, Caribbean, and Gonave plates. It's bounded by transform faults. It's got an axial valley morphology, much as characteristic of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge over most of its reaches. It's got something that we call an hourglass ridge shape, which means that in the ridge center, with this area that I'm highlighting with my mouse, it's inflated, and at the northern and southern distal ends, it is much deeper. And this is thought in general to reflect a greater amount of magma supply at the central part of the axis of these kinds of ridges. It's also got something called an axial volcanic ridge, which is a small linear feature that runs north-south through this ridge, which is, again, in most settings where an AVR is present, is thought to represent the locus of most of the volcanism within the axial valley. So this is the locus of our dive, 5097, that went down and discovered this very deep lava flow. We started off of a ridge line and then moved our way sort of across a ridge onto a sort of a flatter ground and then moved upslope. We'd hoped to reach one of these two mound structures, but we weren't able to achieve the full duration dive objectives. We went about 1 kilometer on the seabed and spending the entire time in this new young lava flow. Just pointing out here the axial valley that sits in, and there's also an arrow that indicates the axial volcanic ridge, which I'll be highlighting in subsequent slides. So this is a plan view map. You can see a 15-kilometer scale bar across the bottom. It's color-coded for depth. So the deepest blue is 7 kilometers deep, and everything that's in sort of reds and oranges is shallower than about 5,800 meters. And that circle highlights the locus of that dive along this AVR. This is a 3D perspective view, kind of looking down the AVR as it descends into that deep zone. I'm now going to flip the view around. We're now looking upslope from the south, and I'm going to zoom in slowly. Again, the circle is the location of the dive. So this is slightly zoomed in so you can get a better idea of the context for the dive. And this is the most zoomed in view I'm going to give you. This is obviously a constructional ridge, but we had no idea how young the volcanism would or wouldn't be when we decided to dive on it. And this is what we found. At the very start of the dive, on the deepest portions where the slopes are very steep, we found very elongated pillows, obviously flowing down slope, very easy to tell flow directions, with a lot of ornamentation. Ornamentation are these small little bulbs sticking off the exterior of the flows. These are highly ornamented flows. And the important thing to note is there's almost no sediment on this lava flow, which will help us infer the youth of the flow. When we move up onto the ridge, we start to find flattened pillow forms. They still have striae. They're still expanded. This is a more bulbous pillow lava that inflated from below, but we also see these flattened and drained pillow lavas. So these are slightly higher effusion rate. They still have very low sediment cover, very little biology growing on them, if at all, and these sort of drained out lava forms. We're also starting to pick up some of these local constructional pillow mounds, which are high standing features along the ridge. And then when we get to the shallowest portion of the lava flow that we visited on the dive, we start to find what we call lobate lavas. Lobate lavas have a much more two-dimensional shape. They have lower relief. And what happens is at higher lava effusion, the crust freezes and the lava continues to flow underneath, much like a tube-fed flow or channelized flow on land that roofs over. And this in the upper left is a picture of the lava flow after we've sampled it. And I'll show you some close-ups later of how very fresh that lava is, but it has very small amount of sediment on it. And again, predominantly these flattened pillow and lobate lavas, which are slightly higher effusion rate, although we occasionally see these pillow mound constructions, and notice a slight orange color on it. That is iron staining. This is something that we have seen commonly at places that have just erupted, at, for instance, Axial Volcano or the Juan de Fuca Ridge or West Mata Volcano, all places that I have been studying active eruptions at. And oftentimes these form at the very end of eruptions, and they are able to support diffuse flow hydrothermal activity for maybe, months to a year or two after eruption, and they get these iron-rich microbial deposits on them. Now, we don't know, in fact, that this is the case in this image here in the lower right-hand corner, but it's certainly consistent with observations seen elsewhere. So how do we know how old this lava flow is? Well, this is a map of global sedimentation rates in centimeters per year, and I've highlighted the area of the Caribbean. Let me zoom in for you into the part of the Caribbean where we were studying, and I'll point with my mouse to the area here in this kind of deep green color, which is where the mid-Cayman rise is. And you can see based on the color code scale on the bottom, this is something like 0.2 to 1 millimeter per year, or 0.02 to 0.1 centimeters per year. And based on those rates, we predict that the lava flow is something like 10 to 50 years old. But based on the freshness of the glass and the unevenness of the cover, sediment cover, in some places there's zero, there's not even a millimeter, I would argue this lava flow is probably of order 10 years old. And we're working to try and obtain some funding so we can do radiometric dating of the flow to confirm that. So one of the most interesting things about the lava flow is that in certain areas, especially in these high effusion rate drained out forms, the samples have a very large amount of vesicles. Vesicles form when gas comes out and separates from a magma. And this is usually a process that is inhibited at great pressure. So the deeper you go down in the ocean, the less likely you are to find vesicles. But here you can see centimeter-sized vesicles in these hand specimens, especially associated with these rims, which, whether or not this is from juvenile volatile coming out of the magma or external volatile from an interaction with seawater, we still don't know yet, but one wouldn't have expected such very vesicular rocks at such great depth. So we're very interested in that. You can also see across the bottom some of the other textures of the lava and the extremely fresh nature of the samples. This is a little bit of petrology. This is data collected by electron microprobe, a bunch of different plots with magnesium content on the x-axis, magnesium being an indicator of magma differentiation and magma temperature in basalts. And so you see there's very little variation, first off, across the entire lava flow. And those colored circles are just to help point out different data points in the spectrum of magnesium and depth. They'll become useful on the next slide as well. But there's very little variation, perhaps a slight hint of some relationship between iron and magnesium, a small differentiation signature, but really this is a pretty chemically homogeneous lava flow. Interestingly enough, when we look at some of the volatiles, and so far we only have halogens and sulfur, we will be collecting water and CO2 later, but we see in both the halogens and the sulfur a positive relationship between the depth and the concentration, as we would expect for pressure-controlled degassing of these volatile species. We sometimes, in some rocks that have interacted a lot with seawater, some lava, we tend to see big deviations in the potassium-chlorine ratio, such as in that lower right-hand panel. But in this particular case, we don't see significant variation, so we don't think there's been significant assimilation. So now I just have a few short little videos, and I apologize, they're a little bit jumpy on my computer, the way they play. This is the deepest part of the dive. We're moving over this terrain of very lightly sedimented young pillow lavas, elongated pillows with the ornamentation on it. And this little clip is going to end in a place where we see a high standing bulbous pillow lava, which occasionally are found on the steep slopes, and these inflate from below. This next clip is just a short little one of one of these sort of more flattened pillow tubes, again, lightly sedimented right before we're about to come in to take a sample of it up on the deeper part of that ridge line in the second part of the dive. And now we're going over another part of that ridge line where, again, we see these sort of flattened pillow lavas in that dark area in the upper quadrant of the upper right quadrant of the diagram or image is basically looking over the edge into blue water. And finally, this is a close-up of that drained lobate lava that we sampled that's got the very gas-rich textures, very, very fresh glass, very thin sediment cover. And just out of interest sake, those two red dots, which are lasers, are 20 centimeters across. Okay, so let me summarize. This discovery of a very fresh, very lightly sedimented lava flow at 6 kilometers water depth on the mid-Cayman Rise represents the deepest known very young lava flow on Earth, and importantly, also the deepest young lava flow to be visited in person by human beings, enabled by the human-occupied vehicle Alvin. The likely age of the lava flow is 1 to maybe a few decades at most. It is produced a lava of fairly undifferentiated high temperature basalt. There's a slight volatile increase with depth. It is formed of pillow to lobate lava forms that imply moderately high effusion rates near the vents, slowing near the distal end of the flow. There are drained lava forms that include vesicle-rich portions despite the great eruption pressure. And the eruption location very far away on the ridge from the central valley high is very unusual. So this is something that we will be attempting to go back and study in more detail and to learn more about the volcanism at great depth along the Mid-Cayman Rise. So stay tuned for our research in the coming years. Thank you very much, and I will leave you with this photo of the deepest known hydrothermal vent system on the planet, which is about 8 kilometers away from this site. It's called the BB Field, and we also visited it on this expedition.